The other thing I find deeply fucking frustrating about this, and actually like have difficulty sort of getting a handle on my contempt, is the way ArenaNet conducted themselves around this, and the lack of leadership being shown by Mike O'Brien. It's 2018. Like, at this point, part of knowing how the games industry works is knowing that brigading campaigns happen, coordinated harassment campaigns happen, and that every time, like, you have to really carefully consider what is happening online and how much fire is behind the smoke you are seeing.
Yes,
like,
you
really,
might be seeing a ton of smoke, but what is it really?
Yeah, like how many people really give that much of a shit? And two, every time you sort of give in to the mob, you are creating perverse incentives to encourage further harassment of your employees and harassment of other people's employees. You are failing a test of collegiality, of being a good member of your profession, because now you are basically sending up a signal that, like, hey, sometimes this shit works, and those costs will not be borne by you, the CEO. It will be borne by those employees whose example you are taking advantage of, saying, like, well, we have lots of people who engage in positive interactions with the community. Not me, by the way. I'm a faceless suit, like, you know, hiding behind a rarely used corporate forum account. But my employees talk to you folks and do a lot of outreach on behalf of the company, and if it ever goes bad, fuck them. Under the bus they go. Right. Like, that pisses me off.
Yeah, and I do want to say that we should move, not with care necessarily, but we should move thoughtfully, because I do think that one of the rhetorical moves I've seen put to work by bad faith actors, but also, again, by people who I know who like our work and respect us, is to say, yeah, but, like, you love shouting at Scott Pruitt at a diner, and, like, one, you damn right I do.
Yeah.
Two, this is not the same thing.
Nope.
In the world in which a game designer or a narrative designer on a game is rude to somebody on Twitter, I'm not even saying that's what this is. She was very clearly, like, blowing off some steam and was mad as shit. I don't know if I'm going to go all the way to rude. It may be rude. In the instance when someone is rude to someone on Twitter because they got an explanation, a 101 level explanation in response to a 500 level, 20 post thread, that is not the same thing as poisoning our water.
Yep.
This is not a hard concept. I'm not saying that people should never be fired for their jobs, and any attempt to say that, like, oh yeah, I was happy when someone who was supporting white nationalists lost their job, I should never want anyone to lose their job, is, again, either an argument from the worst position, the like completely disingenuous. You're just trying to fatigue me with new information, with words, with just, like, you're just trying to hit my eyes.
Have you considered it's a slippery slope?
Yeah, have I considered? Yes, I have, and guess what? It ain't. Because there's a huge difference between someone who is rude to me on Twitter and someone who was a racist.
It ain't the same mountain.
It isn't. And we have to talk about substance and not just form in this way, right? We have to talk about what is being said. What is the difference between Mitch McConnell and Price? And I've already forgotten her first name. I feel Jessica Price.
Jessica Price, yeah.
I got there. And that is, again, such a disingenuous argument, or a naive argument. And I don't mean naive in the dictionary sense. I mean the you've been taken in sense.
Yeah. Like,
that argument is it's in some ways a retreat from having to deal with the specifics of an argument. A retreat, foreclosing that there could be specific differences despite there being similarities in form. There's a huge difference between this, for instance, saying something like, hey, I don't think this person should keep their job because they were sexually harassing people, or because they were defrauding the company, or because they were not just rude on Twitter, but were explicitly targeting people on Twitter and explicitly leading hate campaigns on Twitter and specifically guiding harassment campaigns on Twitter, versus I got rude on Twitter once. There's a huge gap between those two things. There's a huge divide, and we have to. And I'm not saying that there's never any gray area. There are people on Twitter who I think are super shitty and who absolutely do something that walks right up against the line of leading an organized harassment campaign. I know this because I've been on the other side of one. Because I faved a tweet in which someone said once, it's a bummer that Total Biscuit died. I would have rathered him live to confront the fact that for some amount of years he did some really shitty stuff.
Right.
I faved that tweet, and what happened was I couldn't use Twitter for 3 days because someone was like, Austin faved that tweet, everybody, go get him. I still don't want that dude to be, fired. That's right up against the line. That's right up against the line of is this a targeted harassment campaign? Even there, so I do think there's nuance here.
Plausible deniability.
Totally
Gives Twitter all like that. Like your discussion about like sort of the platform and its inability to communicate people to things that are occurring simultaneously, like is very much what allows plausible deniability of harassment campaigns. Like this is how brigading works. Is like it takes advantage of weaknesses in the platform, so you can exploit people in a way that is hard for others to actually understand. When you copy and paste a tweet and look at that on twitter.com, you don't see all the replies. Like you see like replies that are like selected by Twitter for you to see that are usually highlighted by engagement and faves and stuff like that. You don't see the whole mountain of shit that like goes through someone's feed. And so like it's built in a way where you can't actually prove how bad the harassment is because there's no way for you to fucking see it. And like, you see how Twitter lands at that, right? Because it makes sense from a certain perspective, but it exposes a structural weakness that things like the way ArenaNet handles this only encourages people to do stuff like this in the future because it works, it's hard to detect, and it continues to be successful not only in video games but in all sorts of other mediums.
Yeah.
But I think what's bothering me a little bit here is the problem here isn't that the people in charge of ArenaNet are insufficiently online to understand what is going on.
Right.
Yes, there are a lot of structural issues with Twitter. That we can, we live them. We all know, the many things that are fucked up with the way Twitter, presents information, the voices it elevates, all that stuff, the stuff foregrounds. But I look at what happened in this specific case, and I see ArenaNet making a positive decision, not just, reacting to, I can't know all their motivations, but this was a very swift and pointed reaction, not just to fire the original offending employee
quote,
for
unquote.
maybe having one moment in which they were an asshole online, but then firing another employee who gave a pretty considered, measured defense and explanation of what's behind that moment.
Yeah, we didn't even read that.
It's really beyond the pale. I agree.
This was ArenaNet chose to brandish two severed heads, immediately in front of the crowd and say, this is completely... These people have shamed ArenaNet. They brought disgrace to the house of Guild Wars, and they have been put to the sword. That is what they chose to do. That is the message they sent out. And it's not that they were, tricked by... It's not that... It can't just be put down to, they were tricked by brigading. They didn't know how, being online works. They wanted to send a message here, both to this audience and to their employees,
and to their staff.
And that's what and that's what I find so fucking toxic about this. Is this isn't just they handled it badly and they panicked in 1 minute. There's an affirmative decision to send this message about how they view their fans, including their worst fucking fans, and how they view their employees who make the fucking game.
Right, including so Peter Fries is the other person who was fired here. This is a reading from TheVerge.com. Fries, a 12-year veteran of the company, was also fired, presumably for a now-deleted series of tweets where he came to the defense of his coworker. Quote, "Here's a bit of insight that I legitimately hope he reflects on. She never asked for his feedback. These are our private social media accounts. Imagine you're an astronomer and you start sharing some things you've learned in the last few months since you began a research project observing Saturn, only to have the observation techniques explained to you by a layman. Jessica is great at her job and deserves to be treated with respect." Bah.
Yeah, what about that? What
and
about that?
So hateful.
I don't even... I can't even conceive of how
their
that is
attacks
bad.
on the community were unacceptable.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
Bah. You're absolutely right.
I remember him saying, again, I don't know if his Twitter is locked, but I also remember him saying something about, this is July 4th, this is our day off, please. Yeah. In a very polite way, please, this is our day off, can you please stop, stop harassing her? Asking nicely, very much so. This is a national holiday.
There are no days off at ArenaNet now.
No, that's
yeah,
it.
like this is hellish. This sets a hellish precedent, and things have already not been amazing for developers in terms of labor and organizing and work practices. And Patrick, you wrote that great story today about that, and it's just like, oh god, the way this all came together was almost like a heat wave, like a fever pitch of just bad things in the game industry, all sort of calcifying into one little nugget that turned into a black hole.
This was the first time I had. There have been moments when we've been under the microscope for missteps, 100%. Sure. Like, I'm totally happy to own up to when we fuck up on things. And there have been plenty of times when I haven't fucked up, but someone still sends, thousands of people after me on Twitter or whatever. Yep. And there have been death threats, and there have been, I have had moments where, as an individual, I have felt targeted in ways that have made me feel unsafe. This is the first time where I felt like, oh shit, are we going to get a flare-up? Like a real big industry-wide flare-up of Gamergate again. It felt like the constituent parts were coming together. The narrative was crystallizing. The fence-sitters, the people who were like messaging me and going, "It's I'm surprised that you would support Jessica Price in this." Like, I don't fucking know Jessica Price, but I support like the show I've been saying for the last 30 minutes. And it felt like this stuff was building to a response that, and it still feels that way to me. But when the days that this was first starting up, there was like a shudder, like a little it felt like an echo of Gamergate. And obviously, we've all said this before, that like Gamergate existed before we called it Gamergate. I'm not surprised that there are still like very shitty, very misogynistic elements of the games industry and games culture. This is not me saying like, oh wow, I didn't know Gamergate was still around. Like, I fucking believe me, I know. But it was the first time that it felt like all the ingredients were back in the pot, and all they needed was a stir, and there were lots of people lining up with spoons.
And this was that spark. And ArenaNet lit the burner underneath to make the shit soup, basically.
Rob, you raised your hand.
No, I was giggling, but like the thing it reminds me of is like it reminds me of that fucking like letter from the publisher that the Escapist like put up, like about halfway through Gamergate, where it was like, "We've got a new ethics policy, thanks to you." The gamers. No one's going to thank you for your sacrifice, but you've made the Defy Media properties better forever and all time. Now I have to leave this company and go manage Milo's business affairs, which are going to go super well under my stewardship. Trust me. But you should know that before I turn the lights off at The Escapist, you've made it a great website.
Right.
Or so I could imagine.
Right.
Something like
that. Well, that was the vibe from this to me, was just one of those things of like, I can imagine this being a catalyst for a lot of people who are acting in good intentions and who say, well, wait a second, these people have some good points, which is what happened last time. And it is so important for people to get ahead of that. And to make it clear that, we all run our own communities on the internet at this point. We all belong to many communities, but we all also curate our own social network feeds. We deal with people on our Facebook pages, on our Twitter pages, on our Instagram pages, as Patrick was saying earlier. Like, regardless of what your platform is, 2018 means, to some degree, you are some sort of brand, even if all you're doing is talking about bad basketball trades. Be as mindful as you can about how you're curating those spaces and which ideas you're encouraging and are enabling. And I don't think everyone needs to agree with me on shit to be a good person or anything like that. But I do think that I do know that, in 2014, I wish that there had been people who had large and mid-sized and small communities who were not sitting on the fence. And I don't.
Everyone's sat on the fence. Like that was the most frustrating part. I worked on a website that sat on the fence.
Right.
And not because they're full of bad people. It's just that people waited way too long to pull the trigger.
Yep.
Not that it would have squashed the thing. Not that Gamergate would have stopped at its tracks. But there were moments for people to put up the sort of like emotional and psychological support as an industry, and they chose not to. And the video game development industry, the publishers, still have not done that. Like, this is just a reverberation of cowardice in the face of actually facing down like these toxic subsets of players, like. And they refuse to do that. This is rooted back into like why developers don't talk about politics, because like all of this is like in the same mixture together. It all comes from some of the same sources, and it's just it's constantly frustrating. I'm upset with how I acted back then. I could have been more forceful. Everyone could have been more forceful. Even the people that were could have been more united, and they weren't, and We're seeing other, where you see this pop out elsewhere.
Which is Comicsgate.
Gamergate didn't get Trump elected, but the playbook that was established during Gamergate was certainly used by all sorts of people during that, and it's not going away either. But but ignoring it does not. You can't squash and solve the problem, but you can certainly acknowledge that it's a problem, and that's like fucking base level
step
one
thing
that you can do.
But I think one of the things that's going to make solving that really difficult is the other thing this ties into, and it's the rhetoric that ArenaNet used to justify these firings, is that we just finished E3 where we see developer after developer, publisher after publisher sort of go up there and celebrate you, the gamer. Celebrate our fans, the people, we make the games, but you fans are the ones who really make them special. Which is debatable, but it's rhetoric that like developer after developer sort of falls back on, because one, it plays well. It's an easy applause line. Like everyone who plays Destiny fucking hates us right now, but we love you guys so much. We're just so grateful that you guys continue to play Destiny, and even when you're shitty online, it just shows how passionate you are. Like, I literally had an exchange with a developer from DICE where I was talking about some of the flare-up around, the fact that there's female soldiers and a woman on the cover. And even there, they tend to couch things in terms of, like, it just shows how resonant this franchise is with our fans. And we take a great deal of pride in that relationship. It is this inability to draw a distinction between like positive fandom and enjoyment of something versus like toxic entitlement. Very few, like the companies will not draw the line between these two ways to engage with something and theoretically love something, right? Like one is a form of love and one is like an attempt to control something you enjoy, and that's a distinction that is important. But bad actors like to blur that distinction a lot. And companies tend to pretend the distinction doesn't exist at all. That fans are always good, the customer is always right, we are here to serve you. And there are moments where that absolutely cannot be true. There are moments where you have to serve the well-being of your employees, of your business first. Right. And you have to be able to own that. Otherwise, you're always going to be playing this game of whenever the fan, like, basically trying to find a scapegoat for every time there's a decision that you made that's become a lightning rod of fan displeasure. Or just one of your employees had a public profile or said something online that also made them a lightning rod for a mob for no good reason. There's a point where you have to be able to say, like, you know what, fuck you. We're not doing shit. Get out of my shop.
Right. There needs to be a discerning difference.
That, by the way.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, same. There needs to be a discerning difference between, hey, this is actually, someone took a step too far. Someone actually did something that does not reflect the company. And, if one of you started tweeting, like, Nazi propaganda, we would have a number of talks.
Yes.
Right? If some of you started tweeting transphobic, if some of y'all were like, I think it's good that the TERFs marched at the front of Pride London, we would have some talks. And we'd be like, hey, like, you're hurting very specific people. You're hurting them in a way that is not just they wish that you could have a shotgun in each equipment slot in Destiny 2. Because, like, same, absolutely same. And I think there was a place for a sort of a feedback mechanism for things like, I wish that the heavy weapon system was different in Destiny. But that one ideally should be in a way that does not take on the character of harassment, even though despite the fact that it is on its face or in terms of its content isn't harassment, that structurally we need to find ways to provide feedback that are not about that. But also we need to make sure that we're clear that there is a distinction between the two, and also a distinction between genuinely real feedback that when you do step on someone's toe and when you do actually hurt them. Like I've said, there have been a number of times when we have fucked up, and I have no problem saying that we have fucked up. I think we are always trying to write the sorts of new types of stories. We're always trying to be honest about our responses to things. And sometimes that means that we are heated in ways that we wouldn't be in other circumstances. And other times, we completely stand by our heated game moments because ours are not the same as many Twitch users.
Goddamn right.
but there are times when I, as a content creator on the internet, do have to fucking swallow my pride and be like, yeah, a lot of people are mad at me on some shit. All right. I'm going to read all these fucking mentions and just feel bad for a few days and think about what I did. And there's a difference between that and someone who is mad at us because we had an open dialogue about how we were going to or not going to cover Kingdom Come Deliverance. There's a distinction between those two things. And that's for me where I draw that line, is the difference between actually doing someone psychological harm and making content that someone disagrees with. And that's like such a big jump for me. You had something else, Danielle.
Well, I was going to say, so much of this boils down for me to treating people like people.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds almost reductive in how simple it is, but so much of this, from everything I understand about people who do sort of participate in harassment campaigns, is just being unable to see another person online as a human fucking being. Like a lot of the stuff around when Anita Sarkeesian was being harassed, a lot of the research that she had done, and she and like Catherine Cross were on a panel once where they talked about like some research that was done, and a lot of it was down to it's just a game, and it's just like a figurehead, and it's just this idea of like feminazis, ruining their fun. Like it gets boiled down into these very dehumanizing sort of tactics. Yeah. And so much of it can be, if not solved, because these are not easy problems to solve, but so much of it could be, things would be better if we all treated each other like human beings. That's the fucking, cheesy ass cornball thing to say.
But no, it however cheesy it is, I think it actually can work as a lens for root problems. For me, that you build from that. You go, okay, well, why don't people see other people as humans?
Right.
And the answer is multifaceted. Partly it's a platform thing, but partly it's misogyny and it's racism, and it is a culture of kind of a hegemonic discourse that says certain people are more valuable than others. Partly in our space specifically, it's because games are treated as commodities. They're treated as if they appear on the shelf fully formed. As if no one touched them or made them. They often reflect a wild ideology about how certain people who touched the game are more important than other people who touch the game, and not only in an auteur theory sense, but often in an auteur theory sense. Sometimes in a writers aren't really developers sense.
God.
But often it is this it is this combination of factors of like, well, all right, well, some people don't think anything a woman says about a creative work will ever be valuable, and a lot of people aren't interested in how a game was made, and a lot of people aren't interested in any sort of insight into how anything they buy is made. They only care about buying it and consuming it, and all of that can fuel a sort of really shitty, trolly, awful, dehumanizing response. And I don't know. So I don't think it's cheesy.
Thanks.
I think it's like it's the best starting place we can have.
Sometimes it helps as like a mantra to like
totally
just say to myself, especially on my worst days or on days where I feel crappy online or I'm having a rough day online, to like, and again, I'm not perfect on this, but to kind of just sort of remind myself like there's a human being behind this, and there's a human being behind this sentiment, whether I agree with it or not. Right. And to like not do that thing where someone's dehumanizing me, well, I will try to take the high road.
I always do my best to, when someone cuts me off and I'm driving, I was like, man, I don't know what type of date they had. Like, fuck them for cutting me off.
Somebody's giving birth in the backseat, like,
right. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what they're up to. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna focus on getting where I need to go and do my best to not get I'll remember that there's a person behind the other wheel, and who knows where they're at.
And they might suck and they might be wrong.
Totally.
That's the other thing. Like, they might be a piece of shit.
They might. And if you know what? And if everybody in Connecticut cuts me off again and again, maybe I have some things to say about Connecticut.
Might be a little pissed off.
Maybe I'm pissed off with Connecticut for a while. I don't know.